Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this lovely Monday morning. Great to see you. Hope you had a lovely weekend, and great that you could join us for our Bible talk this morning. Our reading this morning is another challenging reading, but nonetheless a really good one. I'm looking forward to getting into it with you. Just to set the context, as you know, Mark's Gospel is 16 chapters, and it's a tale of two halves. We're now in chapter 10, so we're in the second half, and Jesus is working his way towards the cross and towards Jerusalem. He started up north, and he's gradually making his way south towards Jerusalem. And as he does so, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, start asking questions. And shall we say, they're not asking nicely. With that in mind, here we go. Mark's Gospel, chapter 10, reading verses 1 to 16. Jesus left that place and went to the region of Judea and beyond the Jordan. And crowds again gathered around him, and as was his custom, he again taught them. Some Pharisees came, and to test him, they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" He answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her." But Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote this commandment for you. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And they're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." Then in the house his disciples asked him again about this matter. He said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." People were bringing little children to him in order that he might touch them, and the disciples spoke sternly to them. And when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, let the little children come to me. Do not stop them, for it's to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will never enter it. They took him in his arms, laid his hands on them, and blessed them. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Another nice, gentle passage for a Monday morning. What's going on here? Well, these many books, many hours of debate have been had on this one, as you can imagine. But there's lots of ways I could go with this. But I think the run, and what I want to take this morning is this. What Jesus does here, if you read between the lines, actually, is he gives dignity to people who otherwise wouldn't have had any rights. In other words, he has a soft spot for the little people here, so to speak. He looks out here and he dignifies people who wouldn't otherwise have any rights. So, let's take children in the last bit, for example. As I mentioned the other day, children had no rights at all until they reached their bar mitzvah at the age of 11. And here we have Jesus saying, let little children come to me, for such as these belongs the kingdom of God. Okay? So he is here dignifying, he's giving dignity to people who otherwise wouldn't have any rights. So you could say Jesus is here literally and metaphorically looking out for the little people. He's giving dignity to people who wouldn't otherwise have any rights. But he actually takes it further when it comes to the whole issue of marriage and divorce, adultery and that sort of stuff as well. Let's go for adultery first. Apparently, according to Jewish law at the time, the way it went was this. If a married woman had it away with another man, she committed adultery against her husband. Also, if a man had it away, so to speak, with another man's wife, then he committed adultery against the other man. If a married man committed adultery with somebody else, another woman, he could not commit adultery against his wife. In other words, he could be sinned against, but almost didn't matter what happened to her. She had no rights at all. And notice here in this reading that Jesus equals it out. It's the same for her and for him. In other words, he is giving her rights she wouldn't otherwise have had. In other words, he's dignifying somebody who wouldn't otherwise have any rights. In other words, you might say he's standing up here for the rights of women. Also, in the case of divorce as well, the big hot issue at the time was Moses apparently had given this idea that a man could write to a woman a certificate of divorce and dismiss her. And what they were testing Jesus on at the time was this. What were the grounds that he could use for dismissing his wife? Because apparently some said it could only be adultery, but apparently some scholars were implying that it could be something as trivial as burning the dinner. And for doing something as trivial as that, he could simply write a certificate of divorce and dismiss her. Notice what Jesus is doing here is he's basically saying you just can't do that. And actually he's giving rights to people who otherwise would have been dismissed and put away, who wouldn't have otherwise had any rights. In other words, again, he's giving dignity to people who wouldn't otherwise have any rights. So, in the issue of children, in the issue of adultery, in the issue of divorce, in all three of these things, Jesus here is standing up for the rights of the little people, so to speak. He's giving right and he's giving dignity to people who wouldn't otherwise have had any rights and dignity. And I think that's really important. So that's the first thing I want to say for this reading. The second thing here is to do with marriage. Jesus unashamedly has a high view of marriage. Now, there's been an awful lot of talk about marriage and there's a lot of cynicism around. I remember when I got married 25 years ago, I just got sick of cynical jokes being said to me. You know, I used to find them, I didn't say anything, but I didn't like it at all. There's an awful lot of cynicism around about marriage. And of course, it is right to say that sometimes marriages don't work. And sometimes I would actually argue that sometimes marriages actually have to end, because I think sometimes it's just inevitably the case sometimes. But for all that, marriage is important. Marriage provides a commitment. Marriage provides a long-term commitment, and not just one that's made over a dinner or in bed at the head of a heat of passion or whatever it would be. Actually, it provides a public declaration of lifelong commitment, and that is really, really important. It provides stability, it provides consistency, especially to children, especially to people when they get old. I'm very glad that I'm going to grow old with Joe, God willing. Hopefully it'll happen that way, and we'll be there for each other and support each other. And I think marriage, at its best, provides that, as I say. And I think marriage is very, very important for society. And whilst, as I say, I recognise that sometimes marriages don't always work, that is absolutely true, and that has to be technical. And that's what I think Moses was talking about in that certificate, that door that he was talking about there. And I think that is inevitably the case sometimes. That's just life. Actually, marriage, as I say, is God-given, as Jesus said. Actually, it's also so important, he says, that a man or woman leave their father and mother and become united to the wife. In other words, the relationship they have with their new spouse is actually higher and more important than the relationship with their parents. Jesus clearly has a very, very high view of marriage. I think marriage is very, very important for society. It's important for children. It's important for people. As I say, it provides consistency and long-term, publicly stated commitment. And I would argue also being blessed by God as well is important too. And I think it's important. And I think that's actually important for society. And I think actually we mess with that at our peril. I think that's what he's saying there. So that's important too. The third thing I want to say though is, so you've got the whole thing about Jesus giving rights and giving dignity to people that wouldn't have otherwise have had rights and dignity. And I think Jesus also here upholding the importance and the sanctity of marriage wherever possible. But I think the third thing is, notice here, I want you to track over the last few days, that Jesus has just given a whole series of very, very tough sayings. It's in the last chapter, he talked about if your right hand offends you, cut it off and that sort of stuff. It's in the last chapter, he talked about if you cause little one to sin, then you might as well have a millstone put around your neck, or it would be better for you if you did. It's in the last bit, and here he takes an incredibly tight view on divorce and so on. And he makes a whole series of very, very tough phrases. And feel at the moment how you feel reading all those passages, because you're going to hear more of this tomorrow. So just feel the fact that Jesus is saying a whole load of very, very tough and pretty much unachievable things. Hear that and take that into the reading tomorrow. Put a knot in your handkerchief. You'll hear more about that one tomorrow. So, as I say, three things today. Firstly, in this reading, read between the lines and you'll see that Jesus gives dignity and rights to people that wouldn't otherwise have had dignity and rights. Secondly, Jesus supports the sanctity of marriage, that marriage is important for society, for people, for children, and so on. And we mess with it at our peril. And thirdly, just remember before ready for the reading tomorrow, that Jesus has just given us a whole series of tough phrases.